Most people know of Cain, arguably the world's first murderer, at least according to the biblical story. This was a character who, through jealousy and resentment of his younger brother Abel, would lure him out into the fields and strike him dead. This narrative leads us to believe that with Abel dead, there were only 3 people left living on the earth: Cain, his father Adam, and his mother Eve. So there was not too much speculation as to who had fired the smoking gun, or, in this case, the smoking rock. The biblical God is shown to be far more active during these parts of the narrative, and so he already knows Cain is the murderer, and sentences him to wander eternally. The idea of someone wandering the earth eternally is quite a fascinating and provocative concept, especially for someone like Cain. Someone literally capable of murder, no less. But this perpetual wandering has often come under scrutiny from readers and scholars alike, with many debating as to whether this meant Cain also received an eternal existence, whether Cain was still lurking around in the events after Genesis, and perhaps even whether he's still wandering the earth today. In this episode, we'll aim to explore both sides of the argument, and present some of the more outlandish and controversial ideas that have since been thrown into the hat when discussing Cain's perceived immortality. It's important for us to understand the account in Genesis, which tells us exactly the extent of Cain's punishment. When the biblical God finds Abel's body and accuses Cain as being the culprit, he tells him, "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Upon hearing this, Cain laments that this is more punishment than he can bear. He also points out that the punishment is kind of unfair, in that not only is he being driven away from his home, but that anyone who finds him might kill him anyway. So as to ensure that this did not happen, the biblical God said unto him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. Outside of this, we don't really know what happened to Cain, as the Bible shuffles him off into obscurity shortly after this passage. We do know that his wandering saw him journey to the land of Nod, which we are told was east of Eden. Later, we are told that Cain was able to find a wife, and even had a son named Enoch, before committing to a project that saw him building a city, also named Enoch. It is here that scholars agree that Cain's wandering came to an end. It is possible that after having started a family and started a city, that Cain would naturally have settled down here, and though whilst he was still unkillable, courtesy of the mark, he was still susceptible to old age, which naturally came to him. You'll notice that the mark God placed on Cain ensured that Cain could not be killed by any person, or at least it dissuaded anyone from trying. But this did not protect him from hunger, thirst, disease, or again, old age. There is also the prospect of accidental death, something later explored in the book of Jubilees, where Cain's death may have come about due to some natural calamity or some kind of misfortune. Another argument suggests that because so much time had passed between the murdering of his brother and the starting of his family, that Cain had changed and repented for his sin. With this, the biblical God allowed for him to settle down and, in time, remove the mark from him, allowing him to be unburdened by any sort of immortality. These ideas all coincide with the conclusion that Cain probably isn't walking around today, but rather he either expired naturally or befell some other fatality that the biblical narrative deemed too irrelevant to include. A greater argument against Cain's existence and survival throughout time is simply the biblical flood. As told to us in chapter 6 of Genesis, the flood wiped out everything. All animals of the sky, the land, and all the people, who at that time had been deemed wicked and unsavable. Only Noah and his family had been chosen to survive, and only the creatures who were aboard his ark were spared of being drowned. Since the biblical narrative does not mention Cain here, it's reasonable to believe that if Cain was around during those times, he would have perished here. On the other hand, there are those who believe in the theory that Cain is still walking around today, seeing as the Bible never specifies that someone killed him, or that he had come to his end. One aspect to note is that many confuse the mark which God places on Cain with immortality. Indeed, it can be argued that Cain did become invulnerable to murder, or that at least no one dared to try after seeing the mark. But there is nothing to say that he was invulnerable to everything else. Yet still, this theory of Cain still wandering the earth today has persisted, and some of the arguments can be quite creative. One argument puts forward that after killing Abel and wandering to the land of Nod, Cain continued to wander until he built the city of Enoch. Thereafter, he resumed his wandering before disappearing into obscurity, where he either changed his identity or became so recluse that no one could find him. This could be a plausible explanation, but it still doesn't get us over the hurdle of the flood. How could Cain have survived the flood when it was specifically designed to wipe out people like him? Well, to answer that, believers of this theory resort back to the mark, and once again put forward that the mark provided Cain with an ironic protection. With this theory, it would see Cain survive the flood and continue to drift into this new world, where even fewer people would remember who he was. But for those who would take this narrative literally, there is an idea that Cain's existence persevered well outside of the Old Testament pages, to the point that he is still knocking about today somewhere. Of course, with this concept, we'd have to rationalize that the characters portrayed here were actually real, and that the events of the biblical scripture were historical in nature. Through this, some believers have determined that Cain could be some kind of homeless person, or drifter, someone constantly on the move, and who is cursed to a life of begging and hardship. Believers of such a theory have aimed to use the exact terminology in God's curse to reinforce this idea, that when Cain worked the earth, it would not yield any crops. Ergo, when Cain tried to acquire sustenance or try to better himself, it would be to no avail. Assuming this theory was correct, Cain's guise as a homeless person or a drifter in the modern era wouldn't be implausible. If God's curse did prevent Cain from acquiring crops, or acquiring food, money, or any of life's basic needs, then it's very likely that Cain would find himself in such a position. Alternatively, another theory is that Cain is quite the opposite. He's one of the elite, if not the elite, and something of a secret ruler of the world. If you think about how long he would have been alive for, it's possible Cain had acquired more skills and talents than anyone else who'd ever existed. He'd have had so much time, literally thousands of years, to learn human psychology, strategy, warfare, self-defense, heck, even some kind of ancient dark magic for all we know. With such a being who, again, according to this theory, cannot die, it's not so hard to imagine him climbing to the top of the world's hierarchy in the first 1,000 years, and then maintaining his position thereafter. In another more dynamic theory, Cain is believed by some groups to be the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, where he lives isolated from humanity amongst caves in the wilderness. In the Book of Jasher, a 17th century Hebrew book that supplies readers with additional, sometimes controversial concepts, we are given a version that solidifies Cain's demise. In this story, we are told that long after Cain had been exiled, the biblical character Lamech, who was blind, went out hunting with his son, who happened to be named Tubal-Cain. During the hunt, Tubal-Cain became spooked by the shape of something on the horizon, and so he instructed his father to shoot. Lamech, who again was blind, managed to land his target, which happened to be the heart of Cain. Here, Cain does die from the wound, which also suggests that the mark did not make him invulnerable to being murdered, but may have just been a very strong warning to all who saw him that killing him would be unwise. After all, God had told Cain that any who killed him would feel the vengeance 7 times over, so it's probable that anyone who saw Cain would have probably have just kept their distance, as opposed to actively try and kill him. Another theory from the Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish apocryphal text, tells us that Cain was killed by his house collapsing on top of him. According to this narrative, Cain met with divine karma in this instance, for it was with a rock that he had slain his brother Abel, and it was with a rock that he himself was slain. We are told, "For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone was he killed in righteous judgment." The concept of Cain still wandering the earth is intriguing, regardless of which side you might find yourself on. Scripture mostly suggests that Cain's lifetime is inconclusive. We are never told of his death, and so his fate is left to some interpretation. The idea of Cain's perpetual wandering remains a fascinating topic for theological discussion, reflecting on deeper questions about sin, punishment, and divine justice. But let me know your thoughts on the theories we've discussed today, and whether you believe Cain was put to rest sometime in Genesis, or whether it's possible he's still lurking about today. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.